What's up? It's Cody. Welcome back to the channel. Now, one thing that I hear from musicians all the time is that they think they have really, really good songs, but it's just not getting heard. It's not getting traction. Nobody seems to be listening to it. And one thing that they've been missing out on is advertising. This is something that all of your favorite bands are doing. They're running a ton of press campaigns. They're running a ton of advertisement to help get their songs in the hands of the right audience. So if the big bands are doing it, I absolutely think that's something that you need to be doing as well. And today, I'm lucky to be joined by marketing guru himself, Anthony Pacheco from Simple. Now, Anthony has spent the past few years developing a really great academy over at Simple, developing courses to help you learn how to advertise and how to get your releases heard by more people. In the description down below, I have a link to Anthony's course. I would highly, highly recommend you go and check it out. I've been a member of it myself and I've gone through the entire program and it is so valuable. The information in there is exactly what I preach on this channel and more. So be sure you go check out his course. It's only $27 a month and I would highly recommend it. Really quickly, just before you jump into it, if you do find content like this helpful, be sure to give it a thumbs up down below and hit that little like button. Really helps out me and my channel, and we'll get this video seen by many more people. So thanks so much in advance if you're able to do that. So in this series, Anthony is going to show you how to set up a Facebook advertisement campaign in order to help get your song heard by more people. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. All right, so I'm joined with Anthony Pacheco from Simple. Anthony, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do at Simple?
Yeah, hey, how's it going? My name is Anthony. I am a music marketer and I own and operate a music marketing agency and resource called Simple. What I do is make musicians' dreams come true. Just kidding. I help them grow their Spotify, grow their social media presence, and a bunch of other cool stuff that we'll be talking about in this video.
Awesome. So today we're going to be building a Facebook ad for my band for an upcoming single that we have using a music video. So how come you suggest using Facebook ads over traditional PR?
Yeah, the thing with PR is not to discredit it as a whole, but it definitely has its place. But for most developing artists, if you inquire for a PR agency, their campaigns start at about $1,500 to $3,000 US. And not every musician has the capability to afford that. Not only that, but with Facebook and Instagram advertising, you can get started for as little as $5 per day. But from my experience from being in a signed band, as well as working with other developing artists and signed artists, I find a stronger return on investment, or ROI, from running Facebook and Instagram ads. And before people bash at me in terms of ROI, whenever I talk about return on investment, I'm not really talking about money, because your return can be fans, Facebook page likes, Spotify followers, whatever your goal is. That's what the return on your investment, which more often than not, your investment is money. The return is whatever you define.
Awesome. So what kind of things can we use Facebook ads for? What are some of the goals that you mentioned that we would want from our Facebook ads?
Yeah, in terms of goals from running Facebook and Instagram ads, the nice thing is that there's a couple of different ones, right? Such as getting followers to your Spotify profile, or getting a ton of eyes on your debut music video, or getting a bunch of Facebook page likes. And the beautiful thing about Facebook's ads platform is that you're actually able to select different objectives based on what your objective as a musician is and kind of pair those two together.
Okay, great. So one thing that we do with my band is we have a new song coming out and we want to get a lot of people over to Spotify. I talk about that a lot on the channel, is bringing people, getting our audience moved over to Spotify and trying to grow our followers. So we have a new song coming out with a music video. How would you suggest we go about advertising this video to get more awareness on the band and for the song and eventually convert these people over to Spotify listeners and followers?
Yeah, so the biggest thing with that, like I mentioned, is that we can 100% select our objective through Facebook's ads platform. The first step would be signing up for something called Facebook Business Manager. And I have a video for that that'll be in the description of this if you don't know what Business Manager is. But once you have Facebook Business Manager set up and ready to go, what you're actually able to do is go over to your audiences. And from here, basically the first step into building out a campaign is figuring out who it is exactly that you're wanting to reach. Finding a target audience more often than not is the hard part when it comes to music marketing specifically, because it's ever changing, right? For example, today we're working with a more acoustic track, but the rest of your guys' releases are more so in the traditional pop punk type of scene. So keeping that in mind, we're not just going to go ahead and target people who like Indian folk music because that doesn't make sense. So usually I like starting out defining who it is that I want to show the music to. And like you mentioned, the goal is to eventually get people to Spotify. We'll talk about the different ad objectives later. But let's talk a little bit about your target audience. Who do you typically resonate? Who would you say would resonate with your guys' sound as a whole?
I think for the most part, in the past, we've found success through anybody who kind of listens to the bigger pop punk bands like Neck Deep, State Champs, Stand Atlantic. Those kind of modern pop punk bands seems to be where we find a lot of our audience. A little bit in the older stuff like All Time Low as well. But those are some of the bigger bands that have definitely, we notice our listeners also listen to those bands, which are some things we found through DistroKid Hyperfollow, which is one really great resource, and our Spotify for Artists page, which shows which are bands that our fans also like.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. And I mean, I get that kind of vibe when I was listening to your guys' stuff as well. But to kind of piggyback off what you said, here's kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, this is from your record release or from this release?
That is from our last release in 2019.
Gotcha. So, I mean, you kind of nailed it right on the head, right? State Champs, Stand Atlantic, things of that sort. So, I mean, you got Avril Lavigne in here too. But
that was probably just from me.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, this is a great way to kind of find out different targeting options for your Instagram and Facebook ad campaigns. The thing with musicians most of the time too is when they're kind of like thinking of who to target, more often than not, they list artists that they actually get inspiration from. So for example, I'm a guitar player and I'm heavily inspired by Richie Valens. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to go ahead and target Richie Valens for my ads if I'm in like a post-hardcore band, for example. So take it a grain of salt when you yourself feel like you sound like X, Y, or Z, because sometimes it may more often than not be more so like an inspiration artist rather than a actual target demographic.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that a lot of people get wrong is they want to sound like this band or they really like this band or artist, and that's not necessarily what their fans think they sound like or what their music actually sounds like.
Right, exactly. So with that being said, kind of the first steps to building out a campaign, like I said, is defining who you resonate with. And here in the back end of Facebook Business Manager or in the Audience tab, and here what we can do is create what we call a saved audience. So a saved audience, essentially, we're kind of working backwards instead of going through, if you've ever boosted a post, you select your objective and then you plug in a bunch of bands or whatever. And then that's when you're building out your target audience. What I like doing is starting with the target audience and then going to build out the ad campaign, because if we want to test different audiences up against each other, we can actually just select the save audience and it'll just be a lot easier in terms of workflow. So for example, here we're going to name our audience, which we'll get to that in a little bit. The biggest question I get when building out your target audience is what locations should I target? When you have boosted posts in the past or when you've ran campaigns before, what countries would you regularly target, if you don't mind me asking?
In some of the previous ad campaigns, we've done way too much, just trying to cover the whole world, wherever's going to get us the biggest reach. But I realized that doesn't always necessarily turn into engagement or turn into followers just by getting the big reach. So looking back at my Spotify for Artists page and where people are actually listening to our music, you see a lot in North America, a lot in the UK, some European countries like Germany, for example, and France, Australia, and then lots of South America as well, like Brazil and Mexico.
Yeah, cool. So the biggest misconception is that you should only target the big four, which are usually the US, the UK, Canada, and Australia, for example. I don't know if I said that already. But typically people just focus on those countries. And I think it's more so of the misconception that, if you target these countries, the royalty payouts are greater, or Spotify sees that as a better, country or whatever. But the reality is that Spotify doesn't care where people are actually listening to music at. There are music fans in other countries other than the US, Canada, et cetera, et cetera. So if I live here in the States and I save your song to my library, and let's say you that lives in Canada saves my song to your respective library as well, Spotify sees us as equals. At the end of the day, we're just the same user on the same DSP, which that's a fancy way of saying digital service provider or music service. So kind of how you said, basing it around your Spotify for Artists data, I think that's a really great way, because at the end of the day, you already have historical data to build off of. And if you don't have historical data to build off of, you can start with the big four. But the other thing you could do is, let's say you resonate your sound with neck deep. If you go onto Spotify on desktop, you can actually check to see where people are listening to that particular artist. So you could build it around there, like just take the top 5 countries and add it on top of, what country you're from specifically as well. So as opposed to typing each individual name, like Canada's automatically added there, what I like to do is just click on add locations in bulk, and then location type, I just select countries. And you said the United States, United Kingdom, Canada's already in there. I don't know why I'm typing that. You said France, Germany, and what else?
Australia, New Zealand.
New Zealand.
Brazil, Mexico.
Brazil, Mexico. Cool. So this is a great starting point. So you can plug those in and then click on match locations. The other thing too, for workflow purposes, like I mentioned, if you ended up building out multiple different ad campaigns, instead of having to retype in all of these countries or having to copy and paste all of these countries into future campaigns, what you can actually do is just click on this little checkbox, save this list to use it again. And then when you click on add 14 locations, you can type in a name. So for example, we can just say top Spotify for artists countries.
So is there a certain amount or number of countries that we might want to target? Is there too many to have or not enough to have?
Like most answers in marketing, it depends. And I feel bad whenever I say that, but it really does. The cool thing is that if you start with like a select group like this, you can weed them out later on. And I'll talk a little bit about optimizing campaigns later on. But if you start broad like this, and then a couple of days later, you go back and say, hey, like I'm getting a lot of, views from Germany, or I'm not getting that many views from New Zealand. Or for example, the United States, it costs more to reach people here than it does in other countries. Maybe I should reallocate my budget here or there. There's a ton of different metrics that you'll learn when you get a little bit more familiar with Facebook's ad platform and how you can optimize and then scale your ad campaigns accordingly.
Okay, so it just really depends on how things are going. It's something you have to feel out as you go and learn.
Correct, yeah. So kind of like I was saying, when we have this as a saved audience for the future, when you come back to either create an audience first through here, or if you just go direct into Ads Manager to build out a campaign, when you click on Browse, you'll then see a Saved Locations tab, and then you can just check this box, and all of these locations will be plugged in, as opposed to you having to type them in from start to finish again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, easy.
Yep. And then the next part is age demographic, which for most people, usually they just leave it as default 18 to 65 plus. You can bring it down to 13, but more often than not, if you're a 13 or 15-year-old on Facebook, you're not going to put that you're 13 or 15. You're probably going to put 21, or at least that's what I did on the MySpace days. So, I mean, you could bring it down to 16. And as far as, where your age range is, again, you can base it off of historical data from your Spotify for Artists. More often than not, for alternative music, the age range is typically 18 to 35, 18 to 34, around there. But let's say you're starting fresh and you have no idea. The same thing goes for the countries like we were talking about. You can 100% leave it wide open and then go into the back end of your ad campaign and see, okay, X amount of people that were 18 to 24 clicked. Those who were 25 to 34 did not. So maybe it makes more sense to just focus on this specific age range more so than the other.
So again, just another trial and error process.
Correct. And most advertising campaigns are indeed a trial and error process, especially in the beginning stages. So don't feel discouraged if you're not getting clicks or if you're not getting views or conversions, whatever, objective you set. But because we have historical data to build off of, in your Spotify for artists, what's the typical age range that your listeners are?
18 to 35.
Okay, cool. So we'll keep it dropped down to 16, but we'll actually do it to where we'll do 16 to 35-year-olds. And gender, we'll just leave it at all languages. Music is the universal language, so I usually just leave that as is. And next is the fun part, which is the detailed targeting options. So typically when you go in to build out an ad campaign for, or when you go into boost a post, which if you're not familiar with boosting, it's like when you post something and then there's that little blue button that says boost post, and then you end up not liking Facebook because they don't work. More on that later. Usually what people do is that they type in neck deep, and then you click on them. And usually what Facebook gives you right here, when you click on suggestions, there's a ton of different artists you can plug in. The biggest thing or the biggest mistake that I see people do when they are boosting posts or creating ad campaigns is that they just go ahead and do this, which theoretically, and Facebook kind of encourages you to do this because your potential reach is just naturally going to go up. You're going to be reaching more people, right? This isn't always the best approach. Yeah, you're going to reach a ton of people. You might see some positive results. But if I were to ask you, hey, who's your target audience? You're probably going to kind of scratch your head and say, okay, well, motionless and white sounds nothing like neck deep, but I was targeting them. Which target audience was actually working, or which one was actually resonating the best with your music? So what I like to do is actually see how much overlap these different target demographics have, which I'll get to that in a second. So let's say we do neck deep, and then towards the top, I'm just going to name this neck deep, and then create saved audience. So this is just going to save the audience for, again, us to use later on. And again, for workflow purposes, I can 100% go in and create a custom audience or create a saved audience. What I'm actually going to do is just click the little checkbox, edit. And then the next artist we're going to target, who are we targeting?
State champs.
So we'll just type in state champs, click on them. And then what we're going to do is just take out neck deep really quick. And then don't update it. I've done that so many times. Just click on save as new. And then we'll call this state champs. And we'll click on save. And then what we're going to do is just click on these little two check marks. So now we have two saved audiences. And what we're going to do when you click these three little dots is we're going to look at the audience overlap. So again, I can assume that people who listen to neck deep actively and people who listen to state champs will like both. But if we actually look at the overlap, for example, only 33% of neck deep fans or state champ fans actually listen to neck deep. So I would argue that they're pretty similar, right? But they're also different. Or if you look at it this way, there's 170,000 people who listen to state champs. 55,000 of them also listen to neck deep, right? So if I'm going to reach half of state champs fans, then yeah, I can plug these in the same ad sets or in the same target audience because they're fairly similar. But for example, like I was saying, if we were wanting to target motionless and white and compare the two, we'll just do this for funsies really quick. Let's save as new. Call this motionless and white. Save. And then now if we compare state champs and motionless and white and click on show audience overlap, as you can see, only 7% of state champs fans listen to motionless and white. I don't know why you would target motionless and white for your particular genre, but for example, this is just to prove that these are completely different target audiences. So if you were to run an ad campaign and just have that ginormous list of bands that you feel you appeal to, you're not going to know which one is working. At least this way, if you have separate ad sets, which we'll get to later, you can then say, okay, motionless and white got 0 clicks. State champs got 20 clicks or whatever. So this is a great way to ensure that you're not targeting people that are going to be lumped into a particular group, or if two audiences are actually very different. It's better to check than assume.
So essentially, it's a way for us to compare. So we may think that Motionless in White and State Champs are both audiences that we would appeal to, but maybe Motionless in White isn't one of them. So we'd be able to see that through the ad campaign data, that the Motionless in White campaign wasn't working very well.
Correct. Yeah. And kind of going back to why we have these different saved audiences is because I would create different ad campaigns containing these different target audiences for me then to get like a bird's eye view and say, okay, Neck Deep reached X amount of people. Out of the amount of people we reached that are actively interested in Neck Deep, how many of them clicked? Double check, Motionless in White, we reached these many people. These many people actually did or did not click, and so on and so forth. So rather than guessing, by targeting that ginormous list of artists, we can now weed out the ones that aren't going to give us the performance we're looking for and actually find out who, in fact, we should be targeting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, awesome.
Cool. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and delete Motionless in White. And then what other artists would you say we could target for this?
So our second artist on the list was Stand Atlantic. Now, one issue I ran into is that Stand Atlantic, when searched, doesn't show up. I'm not sure if they're just not a big enough band. Is there a workaround for when they don't show up?
Yeah, so Stand Atlantic doesn't show up, and what kind of depicts what is considered an interest is, let's kind of take a step back. So interest-based targeting are people that are actively interested in said target. What people usually are under the impression is that if I plug in State Champs, I'm going to target people that liked the page State Champs. The thing with that, though, is that if we take a legacy act, such as My Chemical Romance, for example, if I listened to My Chemical Romance 10, 15 years ago and I had a Facebook account and I liked their page back then, but now if you ask me if I listen to them, let's say I don't. Let's say I listen to Drake or whatever. If Facebook's ad platform were just basing their targeting off of people that like specific pages, what this is going to then, you're then going to run into the issue of getting unqualified or lower quality people. And what I mean by this is that, for example, the way that they depict the interests is that if I am a huge advocate for whatever interest you're targeting, so if we're targeting State Champs right now and you reach me, for example, I would be an active promoter of State Champs. I would be posting about them all the time. I would be sharing posts from their respective Facebook and Instagram pages and so on and so forth. So interest-based targeting is pretty much the key to reach the hardcore fans of said interests, not so much just targeting people who like that particular page.
Okay, I think that's one common misconception that people have, is that often they think the interest is just whoever likes the State Champs page. But it's actually more than that. It's people who actually engage with the State Champs page or State Champs as a band in whole.
Right, exactly. And I think they actually define it somewhere. So yeah, people who have expressed an interest in or like pages related to State Champs. But again, they're not just going to plug everyone, the thousands of people that like the State Champs page, because I'm sure if we look it up, how many people like State Champs' Facebook page, there's probably a big variance between the amount of people that like it versus the amount of people that are actively interested in or talking about State Champs.
Okay, yeah, so that makes sense. So then going back to the smaller bands that might not show up, I know for myself and a lot of other smaller bands, our related artists are similar smaller bands. So would you say we have to just find larger bands that we might have a similar audience to?
Yeah, you could do that. And the other thing too is kind of leveraging Spotify's related artists, or even looking at Facebook's audience insights to see if they do happen to pop up here. So Audience Insights is a great tool for you to kind of dive in and learn more about different interests, find different age ranges that people, frequent in terms of that. So for example, if I type in Stand Atlantic, it may or may not show up, probably won't. But if they did, for whatever reason, we'll just use Neck Deep just to kind of show you. You can actually learn more about this particular demographic. So kind of same thing that's going on your Spotify for artists. Typically, neck deep fans are between the ages 18 to 34. Most of them are single, but you can also look at things such as page likes. So what other pages are they actively interested in, or what other pages do neck deep fans also enjoy, or what kind of, for example, they're really into Vans Warped Tour or other bands that they like, Knuckle Puck, Handguns, Movements, Major League, et cetera, et cetera. Not all of these will be targetable in Facebook's detailed targeting options, but it still gives you a good idea of different target interests that you could hopefully find. So theoretically, if you can't find Stan Atlantic as a targetable option, you could maybe just look at the next largest artists on the related artists on Spotify, which would probably be neck deep, and find other artists through here that would more than likely listen to your music as well. So if we scroll down, for example, page likes, a lot of them like Knuckle Puck, which, for example, when we look at here, affinity as defined by Facebook, is that this means how likely your audience is to like a given page compared to everyone on Facebook. So neck deep fans are 464,693 times more likely to like Knuckle Puck than just some random user that may or may not be interested in them. So kind of going back to when we're building out our ad campaign, we can 100% do it to where we compare neck deep versus Knuckle Puck. But if we look at their affinity score and it's very high, I would probably just plug in Knuckle Puck fans into this neck deep ad or target audience that we're building out. Same thing with state champs, because when we checked the overlap, we're going to target state champs, or we're going to find state champs in neck deep's detailed targeting options anyway. So why not just group them together to maximize how many people you're going to reach? This is appropriate to do so because, again, it's relevant people that we're targeting. So again, Knuckle Puck is here, Handguns, Movements. I'd probably be careful with this because it may or may not target the right people. So Knuckle Puck. So this is a prime am I spelling this right?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're just not showing up either.
Right. So sometimes you run into that, unfortunately. Movements, I don't think, would pop up either. So all I could really say is just to continue trying out different targeting options and see if they pop up. Worst case scenario, again, just go with the bigger bands that may or may not pop up. So the Wonder Years, if it doesn't pop up, then I am a fraud. Let's see. Yeah, so for example, I think there's a TV show or something, right, called The Wonder Years. So sometimes you'll run into this. There's like the Wonder Years, and then there's the Wonder Years band or musician. So make sure to select that one. You don't want to target the wrong thing. So yeah, we'll go into there. And for the most part, pop punk is very niche. So you're pretty safe putting a bunch of pop punk bands in, a specific target audience. But as far as like if you're a metalcore band or just a general rock band in general, I would highly suggest having or making sure that you leverage the whole show audience overlap tool. Because again, like if you say that you appeal to a Day to Remember fans and Asking Alexandria, I guarantee those two are going to have overlap. There's probably going to be very little, because if you think of Asking Alexandria, they're more hardcore than a Day to Remember. Although a Day to Remember has, heavier songs, they're not the same thing. I would not group those two together. So definitely start with that.
So how come for the neck deep example, you chose to put a few together in that one?
Yeah, just because when we looked at audience insights, the affinity score is very high on these particular target interests. So if the affinity score is high, typically I, just plug them in together. Because, for example, if we look at, let me see, let's just say the story so far, kind of what we did with State Champs and Neck Deep. If we compare these two, the story so far and Neck Deep, so the story so far, their target audience is 190,000 people, and Neck Deep's is 390,000. But when we look at the overlap, it's about 31%. So 31% of the story so far fans are also interested in Neck Deep. So it's kind of safe to say that I can just group these together to maximize the amount of people I'm going to reach. But again, going back to the example of Motionless in White, I wouldn't group these two together because it's so far-fetched to assume that, these would make sense together, or that, although 14,000 The Story So Far fans also listen to Motionless in White, that's just very far-fetched to put them together and then be able to say, okay, yeah, this is working. And you see this more often than not with like metalcore bands that also have like genty parts or clean vocal parts, because you could target 3 Days Grace fans that like hard rock, or you can target Northlane fans that really like gent, and you're not going to know which one is giving you the best bang for your buck, essentially. And I think a better example too would be like if you were trying to just target more so alternative rock fans and see how they would compare. We'll just use the Used for an example. Save as new. And then if we compare the Used versus Neck Deep fans, so you can see only 28,000 people. So the overlap isn't that big. So only 7% of Neck Deep fans are interested in the Used. So if I wanted to see how you would fare or compare up against just alternative rock fans versus just pop punk fans, we can roll with this and try it out. But I wouldn't put this in the same audience or ad set alongside with Neck Deep, just because they're so different.
Okay, what would you say a safe percentage is to look for that? 25, 30% and above?
Yeah, that's kind of the sweet spot. And, like if it says 7% and then like, the actual target audience is like, 28,000 and then 30,000, then just plug it in there. It doesn't matter because that's the whole audience basically. So, yeah, as long as you look at this, no more than 25 or 30 is kind of like the sweet spot that I look for typically.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really good overview of your audience and how to kind of break it down to, like you said, maximize your bang for the buck as you go forward and really see which audience is doing better than others.
Right. You could 100% target, audiences of, or you could create 3 different ads targeting State Champs and then Story So Far and then Neck Deep. But why not just plug them all in together so that you're maximizing the amount of people you're reaching? Because, for example, this target audience is composed of everyone. These 3 that I have selected, that's about 620,000 people. I'm going to be paying less to reach these people that I would, be reaching, paying separately for. And they're generally the same target demographic. Again, just making sure, and the way we tested that was by checking the audience overlap through here. So as long as the overlap isn't, too low, or as long as the overlap is like something like this, then yeah, I would put them together.
Okay, awesome. All right, so this has been the first part of how to set up your audience for your Facebook advertisement campaign. I'm gonna have a second part coming out right away on the other steps and exactly what Anthony showed me on how to create the rest of our campaign. So be sure to stay tuned for that video if you wanna learn more. And if you did find this video helpful, be sure to smash the like button down below, make that little thumbs up button turn blue. Really helps out me and my channel and get this video seen by many more people. And if you're new, don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss out on any more of my videos. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good one.